A VoIP provider account is an IP-based service that delivers telephone calls over the Internet. Since the signaling and media are delivered using SIP and RTP, the same standards that 3CX phone system uses, the PBX can interface with these providers directly without the need for a gateway device to do any translation. Connecting to a Skype account is also possible. There are basically two types of VoIP provider accounts that can be connected to 3CX phone system. Registration-based accounts that will require the PBX to register with the service using an authentication ID and password, and SIP trunks that do not require the PBX to register but allow calls only from the PBX's public IP address. 3CX has an extensive list of supported providers. It pays you to use a supported provider because we have created detailed configuration guides for you and in most cases have prepared all the settings optimized for the provider. We also do all the testing for these providers so we can guarantee interoperability. It may be possible to configure an unsupported VoIP provider to work with 3CX by using the generic VoIP provider and generic SIP trunk based templates. But due to the large combinations of possible parameters, and some VoIP providers not adhering correctly to SIP standards or implementing only a subset of the necessary feature set, it can sometimes make this process difficult, complex and time-consuming, and it is not always possible to achieve the desired level of interoperability. To assist users who wish to use an unsupported VoIP provider, 3CX provides a best effort configuration service. You can request a configuration service by contacting our sales department at sales@3cx.com. Please note that if you intend to request a configuration service, you will be expected to have completed some preliminary tests located on the wiki and have them ready to be submitted to us as part of the process. Since a VoIP provider delivers all telephony traffic via the Internet, you obviously need to make sure that your WAN to LAN border device, firewall or NAT device, is correctly configured to deliver this traffic into the LAN directly without manipulation. You can do this by setting up port forwarding on the firewall or NAT device so that the necessary ports are delivered to the PBX. You will need to forward the following ports: port 5060 on UDP for SIP signaling, port 1590 on UDP and TCP for the 3CX tunnel protocol, and ports 9000 to 9049 in UDP for RTP media. Do keep in mind that there are a number of firewall or NAT devices that cannot correctly do this and will need to be replaced, at least for the PBX traffic, to obtain reliable VoIP connectivity. If your network uses a shared internet connection for voice and data, you should also implement QoS on the firewall or NAT device to prioritize your VoIP traffic. One way to achieve this is to use the port forwarding information to build traffic type-based QoS rules. So you would prioritize all traffic from and to UDP 5060, UDP 5090 and TCP 5090, and UDP 9000 to 9049. Another method available on some devices is to prioritize all traffic to a particular machine, which would be identified by IP address or MAC address. The firewall checker is a valuable tool to ensure that your port forwarding settings have been implemented correctly on your firewall or NAT device. First, you will need to stop the 3CX phone system and the 3CX phone system SIP and RTP tunneling proxy service. Next, from the Settings Firewall Checker page, click the Run Firewall Checker button. If the output of the firewall checker mentions any warnings or errors, you will need to review your port forwarding settings on your firewall or NAT device. VoIP providers will not work correctly if this test does not pass without warnings or errors. Missing or one-way audio is one sure indication of firewall configuration issues. To configure a VoIP provider account, select the Add VoIP Provider menu option and select the VoIP provider service you want to configure. Next, enter the VoIP provider's SIP server IP address and port, and its outbound proxy IP address and port. Most of the built-in templates include this information by default. In the next page, insert the external number and the authentication ID and password for the account. For SIP trunk services, you can set some dummy information for authentication ID and password, which the PBX will then ignore since the provider is using a trunk-style connection. Next, define where to deliver inbound calls. And finally, create a basic outbound rule to deliver calls out of the PBX. TID numbers allow you to provide customized routing of calls depending on the number that the external caller dialed to reach the PBX. You can configure the DID numbers for the account by going to the DID tab when editing the provider and adding the dialed number. Since you will need to match the number exactly, please check with your VoIP provider what format it will deliver the DID number to the PBX. Some providers deliver just the last 3 digits, for example. Some others would give the full number with or without the prefix for the area code. Once you have added the DIDs you need to create specific routing for, select the DID number from the sidebar. Now assign it a name and decide where to deliver calls received on this number. Some VoIP providers deliver calls to the PBX in such a way that the only information available to identify the source of the call is via the DID number itself. For this situation, the PBX provides a mechanism for you to configure this adjustment. In Vimbo's logging mode, the server activity log will display the complete contents of a SIP invite as a call is received by the PBX. You can use this to understand how to configure DID recognition reliably. The key information we need to locate inside the SIP invite is the DID number. The format of the number can vary, with the variations practically always being at the beginning of the number. The country or area code or international dialing prefix may or may not be present, for example. Most VoIP providers, like the one in this example, will deliver the DID number in the user part of the to field. Once we have identified the DID number's position inside the SIP headers, we can proceed to edit the VoIP provider settings. In the Source ID tab, enable Source Identification by DID and set which field will contain the DID number. Next, simply specify which DID numbers will be recognized in this way, the simplest way being to add them all.